It's great to be with all of you today. Since we only have a half an hour, I'm going to dig right in. I assume there's been an intro, but just quickly, it's Jennifer Moss, and I'm the author of Why Are We Here? Unlocking Happiness at Work in the Burnout Epidemic. And I really focus on how we can improve culture in very incremental ways. And I'm going to share with you how that can be done right now. Let me just share my slides here so that you can get some visuals as I'm speaking with all of you today. Rediscovering happiness at work. What an interesting time that we're in. I want to tell you that I recognize that this is just such a fluid time that we're in right now. And I keep saying that the workforce is going through this kind of collective existential crisis or this midlife crisis. It's why I named my latest book, Why Are We Here? Because so many of us are, at any one point, even when we're happy in our jobs, we are questioning, is this legacy leaving? Do I feel fulfilled? Do I feel like this is work that matters? That's something that we question. But when you go through a collective mortality facing event like you would in the pandemic, for example, and then now that we're dealing with all this uncertainty, it's defined as polycrisis, which is essentially a whole cluster of crises that have come together to make each crisis even worse. All of that has us sort of questioning the finitude of our lives. We wonder, again, even maybe even more so, is what the research says, that we're pondering, what is the point? And we've seen this rise of what's the pointism at work. And the reason I talk about this, and I'll talk a little bit more around the stressors right now, is because we can't be happy at work unless we deal with the hygiene, unless we deal with the table stakes stuff that needs to be addressed so that we can be feeling good at work, so that we can have more time to actually invest in our well-being. We're also seeing these generational shifts, which I'll talk about, definitely a lot of polarization that we're feeling. And then again, a new frame of reference. 2019, we had a Friday off in the summers, 8 weeks of Fridays, that would be the best place to work. It was unheard of. But now we've sort of changed our perspective. It feels like flexibility is a right, not a perk. And that changes. I'll talk about that as well. So I want to mention this data point that 81% of the global workforce is still at risk of burnout. These are higher rates than what we even saw in the pandemic. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we're still in the state of urgency. It's 5 years later and we haven't had a time to reset. People are feeling that financial strain, but it isn't something that was, one and done where we had burnout and then it went away. It's still very much a part of how we live our lives. Part of that is on us. I talk about really burnout, and the reason why I wrote The Burnout Epidemic was to talk about burnout as being an institutional stress. It's workplace stress left unmanaged. It's not in the personal domain. But what's happened is that over the last 5 years, we've seen real blurred lines between work and life. And so we can't bifurcate in the same way. It's all spilling into each other. And we've even noticed, because during the first few years of the pandemic, we had to act like we were in surge capacity. It was an emergency, so we were all coming together to try to, fix the problems, to pivot, to grow in a time where we were still dealing with a major health crisis. And that led us to have these behaviors, these habits where we've stopped setting boundaries. We wake up in the morning, we're immediately checking our phone. There's been this increase in what is called pajama hours, where we're doing what is called fun work. I joke because I've been hearing in my interviews from a lot of women that say, oh, I'll sit and open up my laptop in my pajamas and I'll pour a glass of wine, and that's my fun work. It's still work, and we are not doing a good job of making sure that we aren't creating this learned helplessness that's contributing to our burnout. But when you really look at it institutionally, there's these these four quadrants, including us, that we need to be looking at, which is societal pressures, policies that need to change so that we can have more happiness at work. We also need highest level, senior leadership giving permission and modeling behaviors, because employees can't be what they can't see. We also want to have direct managers also leading the way, modeling those behaviors and taking care of themselves first so that they can also take care of others. And then that other part that I just mentioned is us making sure that we are setting boundaries. All of that leads to a happier workplace and a reduction of toxic productivity. A lot of us right now are feeling this sense of, let's get out of work. I'm so tired on a Friday. I just want to, turn the computer off and escape. A lot of us, unfortunately, we're seeing are working into our weekends and our evenings. And instead of getting that rest, the sort of dangerous four-letter word that people are saying they feel so guilty about actually taking, we need to be able to get that back. We need a novel framework. I've been kind of saying we need novel, but we also need it to be matched with the familiar because there was certain behaviors, personality traits, ways of being, cultural behaviors that really changed over the last 5 years. We aren't maybe as kind as we used to be. I said we should go back to grandma's rules where we followed all of those great sayings from the 1950s, like don't judge a book by its cover and be kind to strangers and all those idioms that you could put, in a crochet and put on a pillow. These are actually things we need to go back to. We need to go back to being human, cooperative. The only way that humans progress, so if we want to be future ready and competitive, the only way we're going to do that is if we can figure out how to come back together. I wrote my latest book, and it's really also foundational to unlocking happiness at work and even part of the burnout epidemic. Because, like I said, it's a continuum. We have to solve for chronic stress so that we can be happy. And in this book, I talked about what is the foundation that we have to go back to? What are the certain traits, leadership traits, organizational traits, how we should behave with one another? We need to increase hope and a sense of purpose and rebuild community. We need our friends, the friends back in the office. There's this article I wrote about the death of the work bestie. And I think that is the person that we really could align with, or we could vent to, or we could talk about however, we were feeling in the moment at work. And that made us laugh. That made us have a bit more levity and joy. These are the kind of things, again, that hope, purpose, and community that make work fun again. And then solving these new challenges. We're dealing with real shifts, like obviously like generational shifts, that's been a big one, but rapid AI adoption, we've seen that increase over the last 3 years in an exponential way that even CEOs are saying it wasn't on their radar 5 years ago in the same way. And now it's just everywhere. That idea of flexibility, we talk about what that looks like. Is it return to office mandates? And is it maybe just thinking about what we do, how we do it, with whom? I'll go into that. And then also the collective. If we want to achieve a shared vision, if we want to have shared goals, we need to be connected to do that. We need to feel like a sense of belonging and that we're all working together towards that goal. If we feel divided, if it feels a sense of exclusion, if we don't have psychological safety, we can't achieve those goals. So this is where I go into recognition and belonging, and we'll talk about that too. Hope, really great research that came out of Gallup not even that long ago, it was maybe 6 weeks ago. And I had the privilege of actually talking with John Clifton and working with him to add some real insights to the book. And he shared with me that we're really in this space of loneliness and people are feeling really divided. But he just released this amazing research that found that employees are driven and looking forward to coming into work when they have a leader that demonstrates hope. That's the leadership skill that we're looking for right now. And when you look at this, I mean, it's just so much higher than all of the other traits that we're looking for, and that is because we are in a state of hopelessness. It's it's risen dramatically. There's been a huge increase in a sense of hopelessness since 2020, and the pandemic really kicked us all kind of in the gut. And what we're seeing now, again, with this instability or volatility in the world, is an increase in that sense of hopelessness, and it's not going away because we do feel uncertain. That's what happens to our sense of hope when things are uncertain. You can see here the data shows that just across the board, people are feeling sad and hopeless globally. You're also seeing it particularly affecting our young people, our younger cohorts, and that is problematic because when you think about what you need inside of an organization to sort of be focused on mission critical work, you need to be able to see yourself kind of through that project to the end of the project. You need to be able to see yourself in the future of the organization. And if you're feeling uncertain or you don't have hopeless or you feel hopeless, you're not going to put your heart into it. You're not going to engage. You're going to feel detached because you're not connected to the future. You feel like you're in survival mode all the time. And that also makes a cognitive drain when you are not able to really think about the future or feel safe every day. Again, we're seeing that hopelessness increases mistakes and makes us feel like we're not effective in our job. So, how do we actually change that, deal with that over here, the chronic stress, and actually help us go through this process of making us happier at work? Well, we put hope to work. One of the ways we do it, and this is what I love about, you know, really changing culture. Everyone thinks it's a big overhaul, like we have to have this big value change. And really, when you want to increase happiness at work, it's usually 20 minutes a week or less. It's so simple. It's about incremental change. It's bit by bit that we stack new habits. It takes time. It's not easy, it takes time, but it is manageable. It's something that we can do. It's possible, which should actually make us all feel a bit hopeless or a little bit more hopeful. One of the ways that you can, which if I was with you, I'd have you raise your hand of how many people make their bed every day. I laugh because whenever I'm in front of a live audience and I ask people how many people make their bed every day, I have to tell you the whole room's hands shoot up. And I know statistically that there are people in there that are lying. So you have to think, do I make my bed every day? And if you do, it actually is a way to build cognitive hope. And there's a reason for that because it's about doing one little thing at the start of the day. Your brain actually rationalize this. It subconsciously reminds you that you've done a small thing. You celebrate that, it makes you feel good. And then your brain is more likely to approach new challenges in a more optimistic way. And that's why we want to be looking at how do we celebrate goals inside of our organizations? Often they're just these big projects that we check off, we ring a bell, everyone's really excited, but it's usually a really big milestone that usually takes a long time for us to get to that point of celebration. When I worked with Lululemon, my team and I, one of the things that they were really good at was, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and then 5-year goals. And so they were always sort of celebrating at the end of the week. It's all just about setting a goal, making sure that you've planned for it. It's really great exercise to have the team or have all of you go through goal setting. And it can be just something really fun. It could be a personal thing, but you're getting together, you're talking about it. What's that personal goal that you want to achieve in, say, a month or a year? And then every time you hit that milestone and you write down how you're going to get there, you feel like you're developing this cognitive hope because you see and you recognize and you have your peers supporting you on your journey. It's also for you to feel like you have the autonomy to get there. So no one's really micromanaging your process on your goal journey. It's about co-creating goals and having people help you and having fluidity along the way so that if you kind of fall off track, maybe that's okay because there's a way back. But if you also write down the pathways, you journal how you're going to get there and you create plan A's, plan B's, plan C's, you always feel like you have a plan to fall back on, which also gives you psychological safety. Again, that celebrating those milestones more frequently help build hope and happiness at work. We also want to stop saying above and beyond. When we say above and beyond, no one really knows what that means. It's a very ill-defined term, and it is based on your own experience of work, your own bias. A lot of what we see is particular in certain groups that are more vulnerable. They're the ones that are having to do the extra to prove that they're, even at the same level as someone else. So instead, let's be very explicit about what it means to hit certain goals. And if you're a person that is looking at career pathing and where you want to go in the organization, a good way to have hope is to make that plan with your leader, or leaders make sure that you're making that plan with your employees, and then say explicitly what is the expectation, what is going beyond expectations, what does that look like for me explicitly. If you're looking at being on a certain track to leadership, what does that look like? And then along the way, being able to have those conversations about whether people are on track or not. We also want to tell stories of how our work impacts other. That creates also a sense of purpose, which I'll talk about momentarily. But when we share back how our work matters and how it impacts those people that are using our products, and connecting to people that feel like those products or their services are really helping them, it can feel really good and it can build our sense of hopefulness. So that purpose piece that I was mentioning, very important. I had the privilege of talking with Adam Grant. He's a well-known psychologist and author for the book as well. And, we talked a lot about how it's not a big mission statement that's going to make people feel like their work matters every day. It ends up just being like the values that we care about, what matters to us. How do I feel about climate change, for example? Say I'm that person that really cares about the environment. How can I bring that sense of value into what I do every day? Sometimes it's not even the task at hand, it's the employee resource group or the friend that I have that I've learned is on the same mission. It's all those intangible pieces that we don't tend to invest as much in that actually make it more likely for us to feel more engaged in our jobs, feel like the mundane, it has meaning again. We are more or less, we're at less risk of bore out, which is essentially burnout from being bored every single day. When you have that sense of purpose, there's all this incredible business, outcome that really does make it so that we need to be focused on it more, because it generates this sense of joy and value and feeling like our work matters, which everyone wants to feel like that every single day. Also increases retention, and it holds on to our youngest cohorts, especially because they're seeking that. But what we also are finding is that living that purpose out every single day is easier for those in that executive role. At that level, they've sort of developed a sense of what their relationship with the mission, their relationship with work, how they feel about their capacity. There's obviously at that executive level, it might be that there's still a lot of work, but you're also seeing that ability to have a bit more freedom and flexibility. They've built their brand, so they're feeling that sense of purpose more frequently, as you can see. But people in the front lines don't yet feel that way. And it's often too, when we look at our younger cohorts that haven't been there as long, or someone that's less tenured, so they could be, in a role that's a little bit more senior, but they haven't been there a long time. Sometimes they're not so connected to the job, and we need to give that a lot more attention, because when you feel a lack of purpose, you're much more likely to quit. You don't feel a sense of loyalty. There's a high level of disengagement and dissatisfaction in your job. We do that, we build on that purpose, and we close that purpose gap by really just very simple. Again, 20 minutes or less. This is a meeting that I highly recommend. It's that kind of non-work related check-in, 20 minutes, and we can find out across, this is how we kind of execute on this meeting. We all go around, leaders need to participate. It needs to be weekly, and it needs to be consistent and frequent. The only way that we build trust is to say, I'm going to keep asking these questions of you every single week, and I'm going to still be here, and I'm going to still share. It's when we get into something and we say this is really great, and then we abandon it because we get too busy. We can't let this up. This has to be consistent. And then what we're going to say is, what lit you up this week? What made you happy this week? You could ask any one of those questions. What made you smile this week? And then people go around and share. You can learn a lot about what motivates people based on this question. It's quite amazing. And then we ask, what stressed you out? So people might not at the beginning, when they're not feeling super comfortable, share that kind of intimate information about what they're stressed out about. However, you start to see that change over time. People start sharing more what stressed them out. And you can learn a lot too about where people are in a potential burnout risk. Are they saying they're not sleeping very much? Are they feeling like they're just overwhelmed? Do they talk about workload? Maybe you'll find out too that someone is dealing with an acute situation that's stressful. Their kid might be at home sick. It gives us a lot more grace for each other, and it helps us listen for those, that sort of that language of fatigue. And then this third question, what can we do for each other to make next week easier? It's super simple. These three questions, you're preventing burnout and chronic stress. You're learning what motivates and gets people excited. You find similar values and interests so that you can work together to make a better community. And then you're solving problems weekly. So it's a quick win. It's that quick celebration of dealing with all of those pebbles so they don't turn into boulders. That's what we're trying to do every week, which leads to improved morale and happiness and engagement and much more team cohesion. And it builds hope and purpose. Again, it makes those mundane moments meaningful because you have a team, you have that sense of psychological safety. You want to leave room for exploration. You want to be able to learn more about what makes people tick, but then act on that. Let's explore this for a month. The person it's always talking about loving Broadway. Okay, well, let's plan to have a conversation about that or a favorite film or music that people like. It's really just about giving people a sense of curiosity. And I'll talk about curiosity again throughout, but that again, just caring about learning about each other, wanting to learn about each other in a more intimate way is a really big part of how we build happiness at work. And then I also say initiate stay interviews. If you are a manager that I'm speaking to right now, great way to hold on to people and learn about what their purpose is do an exit interview before someone exits. Every year on their anniversary, have a conversation that just says, what makes you want to stay? And what are the stressors that you think are, potential threats to you leaving? Community, so important right now. The village has sort of been lost, and I was able to talk to Dr. Robin Dunbar, and he is an anthropologist. He's a very well-known researcher. He talks about the Dunbar number, if any of you are familiar, this idea of how many friends we really can have and what is an ideal community size. But what he's saying again is that we've just lost the rituals, we've lost the activities, the things that we do together that build happiness. We are looking for friendships in a different way than we used to before the pandemic. At work now, not about it's not about really connecting with someone because you have a shared interest, or maybe you walked in the front door and you're chatting with someone, who's saying hello, or you're going into marketing and you work in finance. We don't do that as much. I keep hearing that we're very siloed. We're only talking to our teams. And if we are remote and hybrid, we're only sort of talking again in this very small, siloed way. And it's making us not really feel like we're part of a bigger goal, bigger purpose. And what's happening is we're starting to look for friendships based on conscientiousness and accountability, which I say is great. I mean, we all want to be productive. We don't need to have everybody be our best friends at work, but it's also changing that dynamic of fun. And, who do I want to go dancing with on a Friday night? Is it my conscientious and accountable friend, or is it my super fun, makes me laugh, I like to have a good time with friend? I mean, we need both, and we are only getting one. And when you look at the network effect of happiness, this is research from Christakis and Fowler, and you see this guy in the middle, he's super happy, he's engaged. Well, what they found is that happiness is contagious. Very contagious, actually. When they looked at other types of social contagions, they found that divorce is contagious, loneliness is, smoking is, heart health and tracking your heart health is contagious. So we do find that there's network effects in other types of social behaviors, but happiness is particularly interesting. So they found that this guy, happy, his friend who's proximal within a half a mile, he actually sees him in person. He's happy, so that improves this guy's happiness by 25%. Siblings, they are obviously impactful on our happiness. So if they're happy, they make us happy by the equivalent of 14% more happy. Our neighbors have a huge influence. A happy neighbor makes us 34% happier. I joke sadly that our spouses only make us 8% happier, but we'll talk about that another time. So when you look at this data here, one of the reasons why we're not as happy is because we have no time for each other. When you look at just Teams meetings alone, we increased just Teams meetings alone by 252% in 1 year from when the pandemic started in 2020 to 2021. You look at the amount of meeting minutes we have, 45 billion meeting minutes. That was in 2019. Now we have 215 billion meeting minutes every single this is the thing that we're recognizing is this is like a massive shift of how many meeting minutes we're having in it across our organizations in a year. It's not healthy because you'll see that productivity actually goes down when we have 2 hours or more in meetings daily, and yet the average we're seeing is 8 to 9 hours of meetings every day. I mean, how are we getting our work done? This, I think, is great. This was a suggestion of how maybe we can make our meetings shorter instead of stand-up meetings. Maybe it's just planking. If we can't do that, maybe we can think of doing an actual meeting audit. We can follow some really great examples like Shopify and Dropbox and others that have really gone on a purge. They brought some meetings back, but they've said, okay, what really matters? It's like an addiction to meeting instead of looking at it as a lot of inefficiency that's making it so that we don't actually get to connect with each other. Dr. Jeremy Bailenson has said that there's reasons why we're experiencing Zoom burnout. He actually says that for women, it's even more painful. And Dr. Anita Williams, or Dr. Anita Williams Woolley, she was the one that did the research for Google Project Aristotle, where she was able to look at the top performing teams. And she found that when there was just this ability for people to take turns in meetings, there was a sense of synchrony. There was also, women too. There was a diversity on the team, that there was higher collective intelligence. So they were just higher performing. She's finding now that maybe even just going back to having a phone call, the good old fashioned phone call, that it calms us enough because we only have to use, one sense. It's just auditory synchrony that we need to focus on. It's what she's found is actually improving that collective intelligence, and that the more we can reduce the stimulation of video conferencing, the better. Actually, again, Bailenson's study out of Stanford, what he found was that we're staring at our own selves too much. There's just so much, like kind of upward comparison. Am I wearing the right makeup? If I'm, have I dressed right? And we see just a lot of people feeling like, oh, I need to look good on these, on camera. And the thing is that I know we did this where we dressed up for work, but we're not getting mirror neurons, and we're not getting the benefit of actually when we have these communications where we're meeting a person. So we're not getting that healthy stimulus. We're just getting this upward comparison. And what he said is that that's really unhealthy for us. And actually, what I think is an interesting, I don't know if it's causal, but it's definitely correlational. Botox actually had their best year and called it the Zoom boom when we saw this 252% increase in meetings, 97% increase in their sales in 1 year. And then Balanson also says that it's hyperstimulating. And he said the only time we would be this close up to one another, so say we're having a one-on-one, we've got this giant screen and we're looking at someone, so it's unnatural. And the only time we would be this close up in real life would be if we were mating that person or fighting that person. I mean, just think about that for a minute. He says we're in a hyper state of arousal that it's subconscious, and we get home and we're so fatigued. So, think about that when you're deciding if it's worth having a meeting or if it's not, and spend some time actually auditing if it makes sense, giving people time back when you can. If you can finish a, conversation much shorter, don't drag it out, and use asynchronous meetings when you can. and lean communication when you can. We also have this increase in dining al desco, which is my favorite new term, dining al desco or desktop dining. It's basically because we're in time poverty again, that we're just sitting in the same place all day long. And the latest global happiness policy report came out, and they found that the most unhappy people in the entire world are those that eat alone. So we want to change that. This Cornell study found that 20 minutes, again, 20 minutes or less, 20 minutes of eating lunch once per week with a coworker or a group of coworkers has this huge impact. People are more cooperative, there's higher retention, higher job satisfaction, morale improved. And also, when they tested this with firefighters, it actually improved their safety. So you're at less risk as a firefighter of death if you spend 20 minutes eating lunch with someone once a week. So it's obviously really helpful. Another tactic is to spread positive gossip. This research is so incredible, and it really looked at onboarding and the level of psychological safety that people feel in various organizations. What they found was when organizations where the employees and within the organization, everyone was saying nice things behind people's back, which is essentially positive gossip. People just say nice things about you behind your back. It actually led to this higher level of innovation. People took more creative risks. Onboarding was 4 times faster because people just assumed. This is the great thing about perceived and real when it comes to psychological science. People perceived that other people were talking nicely about them because that was the culture. And that's what made them feel so safe. We need to bring rituals back. Lots of companies that I talk to, they do different types of things with their rituals. One group does an Iron Chef once a month, which is really fun. They rotate. You see, like Atlassian once a quarter does hackathons, and LinkedIn does a special thing once a month where they talk about something that matters to them. And there's peer learning at Google, and a lot of this is just what is the thing that you like to do and create that ritual and bring it back. Because when you have rituals, people come together, kind of like how it used to be with the birthday cake in the back room. And people would roll their eyes when they were told to go and celebrate these 4 birthdays every month. But that actually ended up, in a lot of ways, getting people to get up, talk to someone. It would eventually lead into ad hoc conversations at desks, and maybe it would be going out to hang out after work or planning for a lunch the following week. This is what creates a social contagion theory, which is that kind of FOMO, this idea of if we have people connect more, it creates this sense of network effect where people are feeling good. They're feeling more socially connected. They feel less social risk. So it's easier to make friends. And then our natural inclination as humans is to conserve resources. So when we see energy happening within a ritual, we want to be there for it. That is that definition of FOMO. It's like, oh, I see there's energy there. I need to be part of it. It's because our instinct is to survive, and to survive is to conserve resources. We also want to have much more levity when we talk about mental health. Right now, it feels like we have to be mental health professionals, and if something's going on or there's stress, it feels like we have to, be there in a way. And the thing is that many of us aren't trained to be there in the way that someone needs, especially if they're in crisis. I obviously think that having mental health 101 training and being able to have those conversations is good, making sure you're a mental health conduit where you can, direct people to the EAP and programming that might support them. But also, this is something that we do in Slack where it's super easy and we just ask people how they feel on a scale of 1 to cat. Every so often we'll just check in, and it's a great way to just have that conversation to say, yeah, maybe I'm feeling like an 8 today. And people know, maybe you're feeling a little stressed out. It can create a conversation, or it can just be what it is. I've had so many people actually take this slide and use it in their Slack, and they said it's been one of the best things that they've used to just get the conversation going. Again, that sense of freedom I talk about, one of the 8 strategies. Freedom is really just understanding that, there are people that have to be in the office. There are people that can be remote. There's lots of different types of styles of flexibility, but it can also be about what we do, when and how and with whom. We really found that those that were in technology, programmers and coders, when they had a person that they were closer to, they made less errors in their coding. They also found that it made them more productive. It was just that sense of well-being improved by having kind of a buddy. I even looked at kind of the shared programming, shared developers. There's a lot that we can benefit when we even just do a work sprint side by side where we're hanging out and do it in a room, order pizza and work on our own things, but do it together. There's a real energy that comes out of that. And then that sense of compassion, caring about each other. When you look at empathy, which we talk a lot about in leadership, empathy is to actively listen. We need to really listen to other people. We need to spend a lot of time asking questions. But then compassion is that next step. So that's actioning what we heard. You hear that someone needs something. Well, the best thing you can do is do some investigation, come back and say, I heard what you said. Here's something that I can show you or help you with. We tend to, especially right now with social media, it's a real problem. I think we can all get that is that we have this box. You see this box around me, and this woman here, she's a climate scientist. She has two PhDs. She's just brilliant. She was asked to be on CNN, and she wanted everyone to see her essentially this insanity that was her house at the time. She said she didn't even have time to put on pants. She brought her husband in to come in and take a photo so she could share it with the world. It went viral. And everyone loved it because it was like, thank you for just being honest and real. We need to create these conversations, which that non-work related check-in can offer us in 20 minutes or less, is a way to see beyond these windows and make assumptions that people aren't fine when they're fine. That's how we build happiness, is making people be able to say, I'm having a really rough day. And this is a great example of what that looks like. We're also seeing this rise of FOBO. Gallup calls it FOBO. It's this fear of becoming obsolete. When you look at the Microsoft Trends LinkedIn joint survey, it found that 1 in 2 workers globally are experiencing AI anxiety. And a lot of that is just that there's a sense of uncertainty about why we're seeing now pushback. I was just reading some articles recently about employees feeling like this disconnect right now from AI at work because they aren't really seeing how the promise of AI is being delivered. And I say that has been, I think, the lie of AI is that we have been told it's supposed to create bigger, creative, and I'm talking not the product itself. The product is great, but what we want to be talking about is how are we partnering with it? How are we using it? What is the why of the technology? That is so critical. And I think you guys do a really good job of that because there is a really solid use case. And when we understand it, it's like it changes exactly how we feel about ourselves in the organization. But in a lot of organizations that I talk to, what the problem is that people thought that they would have their mundane and repetitive tasks taken away. And when they do, that's great, but they haven't then been upskilled or reskilled to be able then to really enjoy moving from, say, gathering data insights or just recording data and then being that person that delivers those insights or learns how to read the data. I mean, it's a new skill that we need to make sure that when AI takes something away, that we're also helping people to build up their own skills. And then we also have to think about productivity. The most incredible part, and there's lots of AI tools that I use. The best part is that it does save time. But if we end up saving people's time and then more work is just being loaded on to the expectation of workload, then we're not really rewarding people with this efficiency. Instead, we're just adding more work. So we need to say, if you've used this technology and it's giving you all this efficiency, well, that's great. What do you want to do with that time? How do we make sure that you're still feeling like you're motivated, you're purpose driven, and maybe it is more work-life balance. Really, AI should be giving us the ability to you know, hit those same goals without worrying about hours and more about, again, like how is success measured? we can think about that very differently if we do change the way that productivity is measured. Is it goals or is it hours? Because I feel like goals, much better way to measure productivity. Openness. This is the generational disconnect. We have five generations at work, which is just wild. And I mean, there's only 2% really of traditionalists, but we are seeing, obviously, in this exodus right now, of those that are hitting 55 who could retire early and then peak 65, which is happening across the US and Canada and lots of other countries right now, where in the next 5 years, we're going to see the biggest workforce retire. And we want to make sure that everyone feels connected, and that's not happening. We're seeing ageism, that one of the last socially acceptable prejudices, which really kind of hit me. And I realize that's true. You see all these hyperbolic headlines, that Google boomers are micromanagers and they can't Google. And then you hear on the other end, millennials would just be able to buy a home if they didn't buy so much avocado toast. And Gen Zs are terrible to work with and they're lazy and entitled. All of this, in these headlines can be funny. And yet they're really dangerous. This narrative, this hyperbole is really impacting, especially our young people. Both on each end of the sort of spectrum of work right now. Boomers are leaving early. We're seeing the highest departures of early retirees who are saying, I just don't fit in this workforce. I am actually being overlooked for training because people think that I can't learn AI or new technology. And so why would I stay? And then you have this rise of youngism. We're seeing that there's the harshest criticism of our younger cohort than we've seen historically. And what's happening is that generation is pushing back. They're going to social media. I'm an Xer, and in we had the town square and we picketed, or we, went on, we would make sure that we march. You don't see that here. You see a different way of communicating. The town square just happens to have billions of people that are paying attention to it. So we can't overlook that. And leaders, I just want to say this is where you get the data of what people are feeling inside of our younger generation, and ignoring TikTok and social media and where this group, this cohort is actually expressing their frustrations, then you're really missing out on making changes. We want to know, what I want to know as a leader is, what is the sentiment? And when I started to dig into this, it was really like work life harmony does not need to mean that it's antithetical to work ethic. I can be ambitious, I can care about my job, I can see big plans, I'm able to hustle, but I also feel like I deserve a life and I want to go and spend time with my friends and I want to have a family and I don't want to work 80 hours a week because that keeps me from doing those things. And we need to get right with that both and statement about work. We're also seeing Gen X's right now not get enough succession planning. They're 50% of the world's managers, and yet they're consistently being leapfrogged by millennials because we're spending as Xers a lot of time coaching millennials and Gen Zs, but there's not enough interest in coaching Xers, and that's a problem. When you look at the happiness U curve, I say I'm sorry for those people that are between 35 and 55 on this chart, because that's essentially the trough of despair of happiness in your whole life. But it just is a really hard time with sandwich generation, either young kids or you're, in that stage where you just feel like, you're taking care of university students and you're taking care of parents. Whatever that is just a tough time. But the best news is that the happiest years are coming. The happiest time of our life is when we're 70 years old. So again, like lots to look forward to. Like that pandemic impact on boomers and women and lots of people in the workforce, it really did change the dynamic of the labor force, but we're seeing a lot of people not returning. So we want to start thinking about how do we retain our mature workers, grandternity benefits. Did you know that 1 in 5 grandparents in the US are actually primary caregivers of their grandchildren? So they, when we talk about maternity and paternity leave, we should be thinking about grandternity leave as well. Flexible schedules, everyone wants that sense of continuous learning, not being overlooked, is very important. And we really should know that inevitably data just finds that despite everyone's differences from every generation across the board, we all really want the same thing. In the chapter in Why Are We Here about openness, I found that it was just very nominal differences between flexibility and desire for, health benefits and making sure that the work is purpose driven and, all these things that we kind of put on Gen Zs because they're talking about it loudly on social media. It's really not that difference across all generations. We all just want a healthy, happy, and high performing workplace. So I'm going to leave you with this. Hopefully, I didn't go too long over our time together, but I just wanted to remind you that in the last 5 years, we've had to endure the most wild scenario. And I think we've stopped actually remembering some of the stuff that happened and looking back and reframing it. So when you reframe something, that's how we build resilience and optimism. We go back and it's not like it's rose-colored glasses, but we look at what wouldn't have happened if we didn't go through this really challenging scenario. For me, I always think about this one part of the pandemic where I learned to slow down and I spent more time with my family. We had dinner every night, and we weren't doing that before. We were dividing and conquering constantly. And I think, sometimes you need these things to reset your priorities, which all of us did. This is a story of this boss manager. She had a larger team, but she was meeting with these two folks here. And you can see on their faces, they're trying not to laugh, but she had turned herself into a potato on the Teams filter, but she wanted to persevere. So she led the entire 45-minute meeting as a potato and became virally known as the potato boss. These are the things that I think we need to go back to and just think, wow, like pat yourself on the back. I'm epic. I went through this. I developed all of these skills, and right now I might be feeling tired. I might be feeling worn out. But you have to go back to all the things that you learned, all the things you developed, all the amazing capacity that you showed for resilience in a time that was really challenging, and instead pull that forward and try not to just put it in on the back burner so that you don't recognize how incredibly awesome you are. And that's how I think we're going to get back to a place where we're connecting more with each other, where we're kinder to one another, where there's going to be a desire for some of that nostalgia of when things were a little bit easier, but also where we felt like some of those things that were forced fun or some of those things that we thought were cheesy are actually maybe something we want to bring back into our organization so we can have friendship and community again. And recognizing that it is 20 minutes a week. It's not an overhaul, and we need to be patient because it takes time. And inner peace definitely doesn't happen in an instant. Thank you again for having me. I'm so thrilled that I was able to have this conversation with you and that you invited me to your day. And I'm going to stop sharing and just sign off with all of you. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And I hope there was some value that you were able to take away. Bye.